Hi, everyone. It's Tom and Bud back with another lesson on this great man, King David. Last week, as we are traveling along with him, we found him out in the wilderness. And we talked about how the wilderness sometimes can be very beautiful. And En-Gedi is an example of that. And David there spent 10 years mostly running from Saul. And there's a sense of wilderness in all our lives because in terms of a metaphor, we often look at wilderness as difficult times in our lives, and times of wilderness will come. They have come in my life. They probably have come in most of yours. And I'm talking about times when the whole matter of life just seems rough and you wonder where in the world is God. And so we have to think of times of wilderness that they will come. If they have not, and even if they have, they will come, and we need to be ready, and we need to expect them to come. This week, we're going to take a look at David as he goes to a place called Ziklag. And that's an interesting journey as he travels together. So let's ask ourselves, why in the world are we focusing on this wilderness time in David's life? Well, 20 years. 10 years, his whole 20s were spent there. And I was thinking this morning, as I thought about his 10 years there, that's just about the length of time it takes for one to become a medical doctor. I was at a doctor yesterday, and as I think most of you know, Tom's wife, Barbie, is going to have some serious surgery this coming week. And for that surgeon, I would bet that he spent 10 years getting ready to do that. So David was chosen by God, as we know, at a very young age, a teenager, maybe even before he was a teenager. And we know that he saved his country by slaying Goliath, and that changed his life. Because of that, he went to live in the household of Saul. And then Saul became jealous of him. And he began to chase after him. And for 10 years, he ran in the wilderness from this murderous Saul. Had opportunities to kill Saul, but did not take them. We saw him in a place called Ziph. We saw him in Maon. We saw him in En-Gedi. We saw him in Parah. These are all in the Negev. And as I was thinking about the Negev, and I've been there, and it's desolate. It's in the southern part of Israel. You could almost liken it to Eastern Oregon, where, as you know, if you've driven through there, you drive miles and miles and miles, and all you see is rocky country with some juniper growing all over in it. So that's where he spent all of his time. They were desolate places. There were no people there. And yet each presented a different set of circumstances for this man, David. And so here we are with him in the wilderness. And I would add to that none of us lives in constant peace either. There are things that enter into our lives, and each experience can be different. It can be a serious illness. I look at my almost lifetime friend, Connie Resky, with a serious illness that's just taking her down rapidly. It can be the loss of a loved one. Some of you, like me, have experienced losing a spouse of many, many years. It can be a disappointing child, or a grandchild, or someone in your family that somehow goes astray and becomes a disappointment. So again, we need to realize that the word wilderness, when we think about it in our vocabulary, can be something such as the beauty of the Grand Canyon or a sunset at the ocean. All of us have experienced things of that nature that are just beautiful. Or it can be a metaphor for difficulty, a prolonged illness for yourself or a loved one, or the loss of a job, or any type of thing that is difficult, particularly if it stretches on for a while. It becomes a wilderness experience, and we should expect those to come into our lives. David, in the course of that, authored many Psalms, and I love this one, and I just wanted to read this brief one from Psalm 55. He says to God, he's speaking to God, "Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. What a great statement from David, acknowledging to his God that in the midst of all of this chaos and this wilderness experience, he can delight in the truth in his inward being. And I just encourage you to do the same. The wilderness was the beginning of God's people. He brought the people of Abraham together out in the wilderness. And even so, David formed a following in the wilderness. And you might even think of them as an early church, because a church is a gathering together, is it not, of people of like mind, people who love God and want to come together and worship him together. And David now, as we see him going forward in this wilderness experience, begins to form a group of people that are like his early church. So we have David on the run. We have Jonathan's arrow warning David that Saul intended to kill him. We see that David ran to Gath, a Philistine city near the border with Judah. And so here we have him in this midst of this, and you see where he is there. And the Negev is south of there or below there, and that's the beginning of that whole wilderness experience where he was. So Tom, take us to some of those towns where he found himself in the midst of this experience, and what he learned in some of these people.
Well, I wanted to mention again how, to ramp up for this, how the previous weeks we watched as Jonathan wanted to find out. I suppose, when I think of it, he's trying to find out, does my father, is he so intent on killing David that I've got to go over totally to David's side, my best friend David, and I've got to be his friend rather than doing what my dad asked. So I would imagine that it took him quite a while to make that transition, because we're loyal to our families. So Jonathan said, okay, I'm going to talk to my dad, and I'm going to come back, and I'll meet you in that hillside outside of this area here, and I want you to be behind that big rock. Remember where we go over to that big rock, and I want you way over there, and I'm going to be back on the other side of the field, and I'm going to shoot an arrow. And that'll be my way to tell you, either run like fury, because my dad's, he's going to kill you. He's serious. Or if I shoot at the arrow the other direction and I go a little shy of it, it means Dad's he's just talking. He's not serious about this. So that communication was so important. And Jonathan shot the arrow, and the place where he shot it beyond the rock was a solid warning to David. I hate to tell you, David, but you can't risk coming back, because I hate to say it, but my dad wants to kill you. So you better run. Well, the two of them got together for a few minutes after the arrow was shot. Maybe nobody was looking, and so they said, you'll still be my best friend. Yeah, I know. Maybe I won't see you again. I don't know whether I will or not. Yeah, I understand that. And maybe they prayed or something like that. But anyway, they parted company, and Jonathan, he's got to go along with his dad on all of these various journeys and meetings and whatever else it took to run that country. And David at that point went to Gath. You see that circle on the map. And if you look carefully, real carefully, I don't know if you can see it on your, you folks who are looking at this at home, but that circle is right around the city of Gath. It is right on the borderline between Philistia and Judah. So it's if you went to the west, you'd be in Philistia. You'd be in treacherous country. Guys that like Goliath, they want to kill you. If you go back to Judah, Saul is there. So what the dickens am I going to do? And that's the decision that David had to make. And he thought, well, I know I go back to Judah, I'm in Saul country and I'm had. So David decides to go to Gath, and he meets King Achish, the ruler of Gath, and he goes over there. He meets the guy, and he thinks, "Uh-oh, I'm in bad territory here." Let me get back to that. There it is. But he's trying to decide, just do I stay here? What do I do? So by now, David is really seeking God's direction every time he wants to know what to do with himself. And he says, okay, Lord, should I go against the Philistines? And the Lord tells him exactly, yeah, go for it, because you'll save that little town of Caleb, and that'll be a real help. And so Saul goes there with a whole bunch of troops, and he saves the little town. And then he hears, wait a minute, Saul learned that I was in Caleb. He's going to get me. So David starts going on the run again. He leaves Caleb, he goes to Horish, goes to Man. And about that time, Saul goes, hey, wait a minute. Somebody just told me, this messenger just told me that we got the Philistines going right straight at us here in Judah. I can't worry about that little guy David anymore. I've got to fight the Philistines. So Saul changes his focus. So he goes to fight the Philistines. Well, that gives David an opportunity to move once again. And so he leaves Keilah, he goes to Horish, he goes to Man, and it's obvious to him that Saul's out there fighting the Philistines. So he goes, okay, I'm going to go to En-Gedi. And you'll notice on the map that En-Gedi is on the western edge of the Dead Sea. I don't know if you see that. There's the Dead Sea in the center part of that map, right down in the lower part, great big blue finger sticking up there. And on the western edge of that is En-Gedi. And David decides, okay, I'm gonna hide out there. It seems like I remember there's a cave there. Maybe I'll be okay. So he goes there. When he does, then the people of Ziph find out that he's there. And by now that battle is over. And so Saul's going to come back and hunt down David. Big battle's over. So the people of Ziph get back home before Saul can come and catch David. Saul is trying to find out exactly where is he. We're talking about big wilderness country here. And if I miss it by, a mile or two, then I have no idea where the guy is. Well, David hears about Saul's plan, and he goes to Man, and then Saul fights the Philistines, as I mentioned. David goes to En-Gedi, this location on the Dead Sea. And now Saul says, okay, I've had it. We've got the Philistines off my back, at least for a while. I can focus on David. So Saul goes to get David with, are you ready for this? 3,000 of his best soldiers to catch one little guy who might have a friend or two. And that's the way he's going to get it. But he doesn't want to take any chances. So Saul goes to En-Gedi, makes camp with his soldiers. Here's all these thousands of guys. And after they make camp, pardon my expression, King Saul says, "Oh man, I've got to go to the potty. I don't know where I'm going to go. Oh, there's a cave over there. I don't want to look stupid." So he goes into the cave, walks in the area, takes off his robe, kind of throws it to the side. And what he doesn't know is way back further in the cave is David. And he's just, he's going to the potty. David sneaks up, grabs a hold of that robe, that outer garment of Saul's, cuts a little shred off of it, and then waits for Saul to exit the cave. Saul puts his clothes back on, walks out of the cave, and David's got this piece of cloth in his hand. David's men would like to have seen David assassinated. David, this is the perfect time. And somehow David, with some hand motions or something, says to the guys, "I'm not going to kill him." So he waits for Saul to get out of the cave. Saul starts walking. He's a long ways off now. And after a few minutes, David goes to the edge of the cave and he says, "Saul, why do you listen to people who tell you that I'm trying to get you, that I'm trying to harm you? Look at this." And he lifts up that piece of cloth and he said, "Look, just now, the Lord put you in my power and I didn't harm you. You're the Lord's anointed. You and I may have problems, man, but I'm not going to touch you because God doesn't want me doing stuff like that." And Saul finally realizes, am I seeing things? Is that really you, David, my son? Oh, thank you. Today you've shown me how good you are to me because you didn't kill me, even though the Lord put you in my power. And as I read that, I start thinking, is Saul is he pretending again? And Saul continues and said, just promise me that you'll spare my descendants so that my name and my family's name won't be forgotten. And David said, "Yeah, I'll do that. We've got our problems, man, but I'll do that because I respect the man that God has chosen." So Saul and his soldiers break camp, head back home. David and his men are hiding out there in En-Gedi, maybe other places after that. Well, there's a theme here. When we're dealing with God and we're really honest with the Lord, like I'm sure you can think of a time in your life, maybe you were under financial trial, maybe your business had gone south, maybe your spouse is sick, whatever's happening. And you say, "Lord, I'm having a hard time." And just like Bud and I have been talking there, we're kind of going through some of those ourselves. I've got problems of my own. My wife is not feeling good. I can hardly go to church at all physically. So what are we going to do? So I'm really praying earnestly with God. I did that a few days ago. And there's just so much coming up with this operation, this surgery that my wife's going to have. I've got to be honest with the Lord, and I was. So when we're honest with the Lord, that's when we are at our best as human beings. And David's time alone with God built into him a love for God and God's people, for the people of Israel and just people in general that God has created. And so David has this big decision to make, but he's going to be respectful of Israel's king. And Saul, he's so busy trying to look like a king. He's getting more defensive every day. And here's this situation where David is becoming braver. He's more himself. He's got tremendous trust in God. And Saul's getting fidgety, becoming more defensive every day. Eugene Peterson, who has an excellent book about David, notices that in 1st and 2nd Samuel and in Kings and in Chronicles, we're looking at the outer visible actions of David. When we look at the Psalms, we're looking at the inside of David, because David's like you and me. He may have different thoughts going on way down deep in his heart, quiet prayers, struggles, and all kinds of stuff, but he's not going to let it show all the time. So he is not necessarily, as an external person, what he is way down deep on the inside. In fact, if you go in the Psalms, the particular ones that David wrote, are you ready for this? The word refuge, which is, what David really needed right then. In David's Psalms, the word refuge is used 37 times. To me, that's really telling. So life doesn't have any easy answers to it. But one of the ones we do know is that we have to be honest with the Lord. David is going through that kind of a struggle. And so that's the takeaway for me is talk to your Lord, be honest with him. But that's the end of my part there. But I know there's more about Ziklag and some of these other cities and some more things that happened to David. Can you fill in some of the blanks?
Yeah, Tom, again, we've looked at this Psalm 57, be good to me, God, and now I've run to you for dear life. I'm hiding out under your wings until the hurricane blows over. I call out to the high God, the God who holds me together. I find the language here, his heart, it's just unbelievable how a young, uneducated man can come with these kind of words. It clearly demonstrates what the experience in the wilderness has done to him. We do find in a certain sacredness in the wilderness, whether it's what we saw with the places of nature that people like John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt preserved. There's a need or a purpose for a wilderness in our lives. Times when we're not in control, we have no demands on our life, no appointments that are hanging out there calling for us. There are times when life seems simple and deep. I watch my friend Roland right now. There's nothing in the world he cares about, just being there with his ill wife. And that's what the wilderness is about. life is just very simple and very deep at that point. There are things we learn in the wilderness, times of quiet and silence and solitude, times that can be found perhaps only in the presence of a whitewater stream. I remember so many nights camping alongside a whitewater part of a stream and just imagining God creating all that. Or climb up a mountain, not for me, too afraid of heights and unable to do that. Yet there's something frightening about being in the wilderness. And I'm sure David at times was extremely frightened by what was going on. It's dangerously unpredictable. For me as a whitewater enthusiast, going down the river was always unpredictable as to what you would find when you came around the corner. So there's a tension between beauty and danger, between the simple and between the threatening. And therefore, we only learn those lessons in the wilderness and by those experiences. Things occur that are totally unfamiliar to us. Perhaps a radical change in our body. And I, for one, have been experiencing that of late. Something is wrong in my legs, and I can almost not get up and down. And that's frightening because it's a radical change. So what do I do about that? Or we can have a new or unusual eruption of feelings. Somebody that we love just hurts us deeply. Or we're suddenly out of control because of circumstances around us. And yet such times can also be a place of beauty. There are feelings that cannot be experienced any other way. When I watched a wife of 47 years go through a horrible process of going to heaven, there were feelings there that I could not have experienced any other way. And they were feelings of joy, strange, hard to explain, hard to understand, and yet very real. Or we can feel frightened and need to be alert, as I'm sure David did many times. 3,000 men chasing you, Tom. That's ridiculous. And yet how frightening can that be to a man in his 20s? We do not know danger and death might be right in front of us any moment of our time. We're going to be in a car driving someplace we do not know. There are times when we're just plunged into circumstantials of a wilderness. Again, I just keep reflecting on the rescues because this came upon them suddenly. So those are times to pray and urgently seek God's wisdom and his help. A time to recognize the precious relationship we enjoy with God. And you saw that in the Psalm 57 that I just read a few moments ago. How God, David recognized that. So that raises the question then, how then shall we live? Well, for me, it's to enjoy every moment of life and seek new experiences. I'll be heading out soon for another trip to Europe just to find new experiences and see places that I've not seen. And to enjoy the beauty of what God has made. There's a certain beauty even in the physical wilderness. But, and I've been in so many places in the wilderness where it is beautiful. And it's just a time to reflect on, my goodness, God made this. And he made it for very few people, because I've been some places where very few people go. And so we need, on the other hand, we need to see the wilderness where and when we can. And I sorry to keep reflecting on my own experience, but man, I remember how in those days when I was going to the wilderness, how excited I was and how I longed for that time to come. And yet to expect and prepare for difficult times in your life. They will happen. One of the last times I was to the wilderness, one of my partners who was with me died on a beach down in the Grand Canyon. That was a difficult time. What to do and how to deal with that. With a bunch of unbelievers who were there and not understanding about life. So those are the things I see about how then we need to live. We need to recognize who we are and who God is, and always reach out to others who are going through times of wilderness, realizing they will come in our lives. And I just can't get over emphasizing that. These times will come, Tom, I know you and Barbie were not expecting this. And now all of a sudden here is this big element of the wilderness staring you in the face, and King Saul after you. And so we need to react like David did. And that psalm again just keeps reflecting, and we need to live lives of loving God.
As you say all of that, but I think I understand that better than I did before we started this series. Because like you, wilderness has always been a beautiful thing for me. And when I think of wilderness, I think, wow, I can't wait to get out there again. But now, as an older individual, I'm seeing the danger aspects of life, because I see that in my own life. My body doesn't do all the things exactly right the way it used to. And now my wife can't go to church easily. I'm not sure where that's headed, but even as I sit here and talk, I realize that there are some things in the road ahead that I frankly don't know what's going to happen. If the surgery is successful, man, I can't wait for September to come. I'm going to take that little itty bitty RV of mine and hit the road. We're going to go back east and see some relatives and have a great time because Barb's feeling better again. But suppose for some weird reason it isn't the greatest, then I'm at a total loss as to figure out what's going to happen in the fall. So I think this metaphor, and excuse me for talking too long here, Bud, but I think this metaphor of the beauty versus the terrorizing aspect of being alone in the wilderness with God, that is a tremendous metaphor of what it's like to go through life and you don't always know what's going to happen. The only thing you can depend on is that you've got a Lord who controls it all. So there you are, half enjoying the beauty, and yet you could be terrorized at any moment if things go south. So the only, I guess the lesson to me is, as I face the wilderness of life, the only thing I can depend upon is my Lord, because he's the one that can get us through the whole thing. So I don't know if you want to pray and leave it at that point, but I just see that what a good metaphor it is, because we do have wilderness times, and we've got to expect that because life is full of that. Anyway, I'll let you close out.
Well, Tom, and I see that in David out there in that wilderness, not knowing whether Saul is going to catch him and kill him, just like you don't know what the outcome of that surgery is going to be.
Yeah.
And yet we see these wonderful Psalms and how he was able to express that. And gosh, I've known you for 50 years, and I know you're like David, that you love God and that you are going to trust him because you have no one else to trust. And you know that God is going to do the right thing. I prayed that he would not take my wife, and he took her, and then he gave me a beautiful young gal to take me the rest of the way through my life. So God will do the right thing. And you and I both know that. And so did David somehow. Let's pray. Father, where would we be without you? And how would we live our lives without you? Like the rest of the world does, trusting in themselves or trusting in a doctor or trusting in who knows who. We trust in you. We know that doctor who's going to do that surgery, he's going to do it your way. You're going to guide his mind and his hand. You're going to decide the outcome, and you're going to make it happen. And we will rejoice and be glad in what takes place. So we thank you for these wilderness experiences because they build us up in our trust. And we trust you because you love us so much that you went above and beyond and gave the life of your son that we might have life. So we love you. We thank you. We bless you. We count on your blessing in all that takes place. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Now, next week, Tom, we're going to take a look at this whole matter of grief. Because when things happen different than we would like them to, grief comes into our lives. And again, and I apologize for continually referring to Roland, but here's this guy, he's grieving over what he's seeing happen with his wonderful life of so many years. So I'm looking forward to that, to see what you and I learn and are able to share with the others. So we'll be back next week to do exactly that.